John, what's the agenda for this week?
It's a bit of a juggling act with 2 interchange, 2 subs, 7 non-competing players that you can bring in at half time. So it's it's a real juggling act about getting the game time we want to into certain players in this game rather than playing in the waffle, but making sure they get enough time, because the non-competing players can obviously only play a half. So we won't use the 7 non-competing players. We'll probably only have 4 that we may use for half a game. With
Daniel Kerr, notice you didn't have him doing a lot out there today, but he's named in your squad for Saturday. What do you expect him to do?
Well, at this stage, the aim is that he'll play 2.5 quarters, something like that. So that's the plan at this stage, but that'll all get signed off after training tomorrow. So it might come back to a half, it might be nothing. We just make sure that the timing is right.
Why was he sort of not doing much today? Was that just a normal rest for him, the way you manage him? Or?
That's just today's session, so he was in with a big group of players, just not doing too much. He trained yesterday.
Embers and Nick Nat are out there as well. What's the plan for them?
Probably next week. They're both doing enough to say they're ready to go. They're doing a lot of our full training, contact stuff and all that. So they could play this week, but there's no urgency. We'll just take the caution to give them another week or 2.
You mentioned previously that the substitute rule will have a big impact in round 2. Have you thought? I mean, have you got an opinion on it at the moment? Is it something that you're worried preparing for?
No, not worried about it. It just takes a bit of planning. So this week, because you're basically playing 2 teams in the first and the second half, you reset your team. So a guy that you sub out in the second quarter can actually then come back and play the second half. He's not out for the game. So we're treating it as though it's 2 different halves where we can get game time into players, which is okay on one hand, but there is the other fact that the 4 you can bring in at half time, they are done and they can only play a half, and they're obviously the guys they replace are out of the game. So how many guys we only want to play for the first or second half, that's the issue we're working through. But the sub rules just adds a layer of interest to it for us.
Will any of the other squad members play waffle practice games this week?
Yeah, I think we're sending 6 back into the waffle.
Would you rather the pre-season subs were exactly the same as the home and away fixture, so it was more accurate?
It's not a major issue, no. We've had last year to have a look. We understand how that sub works now. So the biggest issue for us at the moment is just in terms of managing the game time we want to get into players. So having only, as I said, this week, because you can play it in 2 halves, it's not as though we've got 2 subs for the whole game that we're waiting to use late in the third or last quarter. We can use them in both halves. So it cancels out any negative effect.
Schofield, Scott Selwood, what about them? What sort of game time do you expect them?
Probably the same as Curry. Schofield, he may be one that we just play for a half, all up, but he may play for another quarter or half a quarter as well. So 50 to 60 minutes, something like that.
What about Coxie? Played last week, obviously, as well. Will this be his last hit out for round 1, or will he? Not
at this stage, no. He'll play tomorrow. We'll assess him for next week, weigh that up. Nick's going to be back in and going next week or the week after. So, our plan for Coxie is he'll rest 1 game somewhere, but that's about it.
Would that be the case with most of your senior players, John, that you'd expect them to sit out for one of the pre-season games? Yeah,
not just senior players, some of the younger players as well. So Gaff, Darling will probably sit out for a game somewhere.
Of your younger players, who can we expect to see in action on Saturday?
Out of the younger players, Blaine Wilson, Jacob Brennan, Fraser McInnes. That's the majority of the younger players, I think. Anyone else you remember? That's about it. maybe Tunbridge, get some ground time.
How much of a bonus would be for some of these young players if you did reach the grand final to experience something like that early on in their careers?
Yeah, well, that's where it gets tough, because later in the pre-season you're heading back towards getting your more senior team in and going, so the younger players may miss out on that opportunity if it arises. So it's not really a focus for us. It's something that we see the benefit for them to prepare and play this week is as much as any other week.
We've seen teams previously that have done well in the NAB Cup, they often do well in the season proper. So is there any bonus at all in it? As you
Not really. I mean, there's prize money, which the club are always happy with, they'll take. Yeah, I suppose there's a correlation. If the teams that do well in the NAB Cup do well in season, generally they are good teams. So we'd like to play some really good footy through the NAB Cup to see where we're at.
Players like Stevens and Strike have been, you know, the more mature, more experienced younger players. Do you see them as ready to go round one?
Yeah, they are ready to go, definitely. Strike will play some limited game time for West Perth this weekend. But yeah, they're certainly ready to go.
Throwing Swift into that mix. So these games really important for those guys that are, I guess, on the fringe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's great for the amount of ground time they're getting playing alongside Coxie and Pritter through the midfield. Those guys. So it's huge for their development, and it's giving us a good indication of where they're at with their footy and what they can add to the team.
Do they have a different attitude in these games to the senior players?
No, I don't think so. No, all the senior players are out there to show that they're working hard to improve their footy and play at their best.
John Darren last said on SEN that you look closely at the Geelong model from last year, resting senior players. Is that something you've talked about with Coxie?
It's something that we'll consider, but a lot of the times that takes care of itself with either your bye week or with players with injuries. So quite often it's too hard to plan this far out, because you plan that someone might need a light week in round 18, but they get injured in round 13 and miss 2 weeks. So we'll just manage it as we go. But there won't be a heavy resting policy. It'll be just normal player management on our behalf, and there's quite often weeks where players are sore and can't play at 100%, so there are times when maybe they won't be up for selection.
Someone like Coxie, you fully expect him to be able to play every game?
Yes, yep.
John, you had a practice match against Perth for your backup players playing, had to be called off. Any concern that opponents of the reserves teams in the Waffle may use that as a reason why the proposal shouldn't go ahead?
No concerns about that. I know they will, because that's what they're looking for, you know, reasons. But we won't be playing 26 players in every game throughout the season like we are this week, and in season we won't be resting players or have the luxury of managing players' game times like we do in this round. So, you know, we're resting probably 6, maybe 7 players this week that would be right to play further advance in the season, and we're playing 4 extras on the field, and we're sending 6 back to the Waffle, so we've got plenty of numbers.
You and Fremantle appear to be confident that there'll be something in place next year. The sentiment coming out of the West Australian Football Commission seems similar to that. That's still your feeling, that there'll be some sort of model in place for you to have a reserves team in 2013?
Yeah, and depending how you term it, we would call it a team competing in a different competition. So if they're competing in the WAFL full time, they'll be a WAFL team. Otherwise, they'll be competing in some format where the Football Commission can have a look at the impact of both teams playing. So whether it's playing teams with byes or whatever it may be, the format they'll look at will give us some indication. So we're confident in some form we'll be able to have our players that aren't in the AFL team each week playing together.
Does that format bother you at all? Do you have a preference?
Not at the moment, no. The preference is around getting one that is going to work really well for both the WAFL and for us and be sustainable.